Welcome to the Health Angle Podcast with Dr. Mike Headley and Dr. Gordon Fimwright, where we'll be exploring different angles of health to achieve the best version of yourself. Now, here's your hosts, Dr. Mike and Dr. Gordon.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike, and with me is Dr. Gordy. Welcome.
Hey, Dr. Mike, good to be here again. Core strength. I can't wait for this subject.
It's really important, as doctors of chiropractic. We've already talked about a previous episode on our podcast about posture, and one of the main benefits of having a strong core is it improves your posture. So before we started, to give practical advice, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about why it's important to have a really strong core.
I think it's a great idea. I think people should know a little bit about the anatomy, why it's important, and then we'll end with some exercises, things that people can actually do to be proactive.
Absolutely. So I'll go into the why, and then I'll let you get into the anatomy and things like that. But here's like a top 10 list on why it's important to do core workout. Even when you do yoga or go to the gym, do weights, you're a walker, you're a swimmer, you're a runner, you want to work on your posture. Here's a top 10 list. It improves your balance and stability. There's no exercise equipment needed, and you're more of a gym guy than I am, Dr. Gordy. So maybe you can, when we go through what to do at the end, maybe you can talk about gym equipment that people can use if they want to use equipment. But for the most part, there's like 50 things you can do without equipment. It makes it easier to do most daily activities, which is great. Helps you reach your fitness goals faster. It helps you improve your posture. You can help reduce injury. Helps you look better because your posture is better. You can have a flatter stomach. And it connects us to our entire support system, because a core is a good word, because it's the core of our structure, our body, and our being. So it connects our upper half to our lower half. And when that's strong and healthy and well, keeps our upper body stronger, our lower body stronger. And it's just one of the most fundamental things. If you want to prevent back injuries, you want to just be overall fit and healthy and have good posture and functionality and be a good breather, it's just important to have a good core overall.
I couldn't agree more. It's interesting when people think of core, they automatically think of just the abs, just looking great, six-pack abs. But the thing is there's a whole complex group of muscles that make up the core. It's not only about the abs. It's a part, no doubt about it, but there's an anterior, the front part of your body that makes up the core, and there's also the posterior, the back portion of it. And there's all these compensation and kinetic chain properties, so your body can literally compensate. And then it's made up of muscles, not only your abdominals, like I was talking about, but also the lower back, the hip, and the pelvis. And the problem is if you have a weak core, that includes poor posture, that could lead to chronic low back pain. And people notice that their pelvis will start to tilt forward when they walk. And you see the women in high heels, Mike, I think we see this all the time with patients. When I used to take more x-rays too, I'd have a woman come in. She said, oh, I'm a business lady. I'm always on my feet. I always have to wear these high heels. And you take an x-ray and their pelvis is rotated, and you can see this accentuated forward C-curve. And the problem with that is it tilts the pelvis and it completely throws off the core muscles. And then another thing, the imbalances, like you said, Dr. Mike, again, compensational effects can affect the IT. How many people do we have that they just feel like the IT band, especially right above the hip, and they can't tell if it's a hip problem or if it's just right above the hip? It's like where a trigger point is almost as consistent as these guys right here, your traps. Yeah. Most people, they have forward head posturing. These muscles are always working, and there's always trigger points in 90% of the population. These and the equivalent would be right above the hip joint, and that's where a lot of people have problems. And that can be just part of the core as well. And I talked about this earlier about the heel lift study. When you talk about compensational effect or the kinetic chain, how things can compensate up or down from the core. They did this heel lift study where they took podiatrists and they put them in one side where they lifted the heel And some had local ankle pain, others had knee pain, others had hip pain, others had pelvis, low back, mid back, all the way up to the neck. So it could compensate and cause problems all the way up and down the spine. So the core can be really important. So if you have a strong core, that stabilizes the back and improves the balance and alignment. So the better the base, in other words, the better the core, the better you are. And that improves training and performance. And even if you do activities such as walking and mountain biking or just anything recreation, just gives your body a little more stabilization. And even seniors that experience low back problems, they work on their core, and they've been shown to have better agility and strength to reduce associated pain most of the time in the low back. So the better posture, the better core, supports the spine, improves the posture, reduces the different tension along the spine. So, and even one thing, Dr. Mike, this is my last point, if we go right back to you, is the core strength also helps with breathing. And the diaphragm, which is just at the base of the lungs, it's kind of dome shape. It helps you like basically breathing when you expel air out and inhale. It's just another muscle. So if you like bear down, so to speak, you're using your diaphragm and the intercostal muscles that help you breathe in and out as well. So diaphragm is another one that's really quite related to the core muscle group.
Absolutely. Great information. And I really liked to summarize, the core isn't just our six-pack or lack of six-pack abs. It's the obliques we'll talk about on the sides and the back. And that's, I say that it creates a cylinder around what's inside is our spine. So our muscles are the biggest protector of our joints, including our spine. So when we have this strong cylinder from our belly button all the way to the back, that really, really protects the internal organs and our precious spine and spinal cords. So it's really, really important to have a good core. I'm going to just jump in and talk about testing. And if you measure something, you can improve it. And I think it's important to have a baseline where people are at. And I said this on our posture podcast, Dr. Gordy, that 80 to 90% of the people ask, do you think you have good posture? That 90% will say they have poor posture. And then I check them and I go, oh, your posture is better than you thought. Almost 100% of people think they have a weak core. And so almost 100% of the people I try to get to do some kind of core work because they're weak. Well, it affects so many things, as you said. So I think there's a couple simple little tests that people can do to see what a benchmark is, to see where they are to start with. And then when you go through the anatomy, I'll talk about maybe some challenges that people could do for the first part of this year, and then we can get into some specific exercises. I think one of the fundamental things to do is a plank position on your forearms and your toes and being really straight, keeping your core and your abdomen off the ground. The gold standard is to be able to do that for 1 minute. And don't feel bad if you can't do that for a minute. If you do it 10 seconds, you do it 20 seconds, you make it 30 seconds. But the goal is to do it for a minute, 60 seconds, minimum. We'll talk about challenges where people after a month can do it 3+ minutes. But you want to just test yourself. In grade school, most people had someone hold your feet and we did sit-up challenges and see how many sit-ups you can do in 60 seconds. I'm kind of curious what you think of, Dr. Gordy, of people doing true sit-ups. And online, you can see there's standards based on your age. I'm not a huge fan of doing sit-ups, quite frankly. I'd rather have them just test to see how long they can hold a push-up plank or a forearm plank to see if they can get to that minute mark. If you can get to the minute mark, you can go 2-3+ minutes. What's your theory on sit-ups, Dr. Gordy, before you go into anatomy?
I'm in the exact same boat as you, Dr. Mike. Sit-ups, I just think it's too much strain on the low back.
Yeah.
And there's so many other things that you can do without putting the strain on your back that accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of sit-ups.
Yeah, I think we both agree on not getting injured so you can keep going to the gym, so you can keep going to the volleyball court, so you keep walking the dog, so you keep in the game. And we just want to avoid injuries. And sit-ups have more risk, even though they look pretty simple and easy.
Couldn't agree more. And especially if you do have a low back problem, well, probably sit-ups are not the best thing to do because you're putting so much tension and force on the back as you're doing sit-ups.
Yeah, at the end, we'll teach everybody simple things that really, really are safe to do with even with a pretty touchy low back. So tell me about anatomy.
All right, well, I'm going to start with some muscle groups. This is going to be fun. So when you talk about six-pack abs, now these are all core muscles I'm covering, but the six-pack abs, the muscle is actually called the rectus abdominis. So it runs from basically your ribs in the front all the way down to your pelvis. And so if you curl up, this is the muscle you're using. So if a woman is pregnant and she's laying on her back and she's trying to get up, this is the muscle that's probably not going to work so well for her, especially if she's in the third trimester, the rectus abdominum. This muscle helps people curl. So crunches, I'll talk about more about exercises, but this is the one when you're doing crunches, this is the muscle you're using. Now the obliques, you had mentioned, Mike, there's an internal, external oblique. And these are the outermost muscles right on the side. These are the muscles that run diagonally, basically from the pelvis up to the lower ribs. And these allow us to twist or rotate. And so these are the internal and external oblique muscles. Now the transverse muscle, if you suck in your gut, this is the muscle you're using. It's the deepest abdominal muscle. It acts almost like a corset. Or let's say you have one of those lumbar support that even goes around the stomach, responsible for compression and hugs the abdominal, and it supports the spine, and it prevents you from hyperflexion, which is going forward too much, or hyperextension, going back too much. So that is the transverse abdominis. So the other ones that most people don't think of when it comes to core are the erector spinae muscle. And I'm not going to get into the detail. There's a lot of subgroups and muscles, and we don't need to get all of them, but I think just the basics. So this is the spinal muscle that basically runs up and down in the back of your spine on both sides. And then you get the pelvic floor. This sits on the bottom of the torso. These muscles are basically the hammock along the pelvic floor, and it supports the internal organs. So this muscle helps to stabilize the spine, so right on the pelvic floor. And then we talked about the diaphragm already. This is at the base of the lungs. And if you're sneezing or you're defecating, this is the internal pressure that is caused where the diaphragm is fully engaged. So this muscle becomes stiff. And the reason it's a good muscle to become stiff, because when you're initially creating motion or doing excess motion, the diaphragm will cause kind of a stiffness to stabilize that area. So the core is basically your center. It's your center of gravity. It's a stabilization center. And it also, like I said earlier, compensational kinetic chain effects. If you're overpowering one muscle versus the other, for example, you got in the front below the pelvis is your quadriceps. Quad meaning four. There's four muscles that attach into your pelvis. You got the abdominal one and all those muscles of the core. And then in the back, you have your hamstring attaching into the pelvis. And then you got your lumbar or low back muscles. There's kind of a kinetic chain property where they all work in harmony together, so to speak.
So that was really good, Dr. Gordy, because if we just do the plank like we talked about, that doesn't hit our whole core. And it's not wrong or bad, but it's like only doing biceps, right? We want to maybe do triceps too, to have balance and to have not just big guns like myself, but we want to have those big horseshoe triceps as well. And so if you do a plank and you can't hold it for a minute, I would search on your favorite search engine, beginner 30-day plank challenge, because after 30 days, you'll be able to get to 1 minute of a plank. And if you're already can do a minute and you're a seasoned, just type in advanced 30-day plank challenge. And I did that a few years ago with my wife. And at the end of 30 days, Dr. Gordy, we did a 3.5 minute plank. And that was a lot for me.
That's
3.5 minutes. I go, wow. I mean, I'm not very far off the ground. It felt like fell off my roof or something because when I was tired, but it was really, really exciting just to go incrementally every day for 30 days. So I challenge our listeners to do either a beginner or an advanced plank challenge. And the beginner ones are basically just forearm planks. If you want to do an advanced one, there's 30 different types of planks that you can do so you don't get bored. And so you can go from roughly 1 minute to 3 to 4 to 5 minutes doing that. And I asked my practice members this week what their favorite core exercise was. And by far and away, it's planks because it's safe on the back. Very few people even mentioned sit-ups. A lot did some crunches and some other equipment in the gym. But a couple people said the overall exercise that's really good for your core, and they showed me some documentation on this, is something called the farmer's walk. Do you know what the farmer's walk is, Dr. Gordy?
No, I have no idea.
So farmers in general, they carry feed and water and things in both hands. And so you grab 2 5-gallon pails full of water. That's roughly 40 pounds in each hand. And so when you're walking with it, you have to balance basically so you don't spill all the water out. So you're keeping your core in that cylinder that you talked about, all those different muscles. You're helping your posture stay up, working on traps and legs and calves and balance and core. So that's an overall. Or you can grab some firewood. You can go to the gym and grab some 40-pound weights if you choose and walk around the gym as a farmer's walk. And it's a really good core exercise, pretty generic, but I call that a functional movement that if you concentrate on your core can really help it. So my takeaway, Dr. Gordy, is test yourself on a basic plank. If you're under 1 minute, I challenge you to do a basic challenge or do an advanced challenge to go to the next level with your core training. So with that, I'm kind of curious what some of your favorite core exercises are, and our listeners, what you can teach them about strengthening their core.
Absolutely. So we talked about the rectus abdominis. That's the one that runs in the front, where if you want six packs, that's the one you do. So crunches, as simple as that sound. Before I get into this, Mike, I think if people if they want to structure their workout, 2 to 3 times a week is a good amount to really work on your core. So if you start with your abdominal and you do crunches, you can just do a set of crunches, and you're going to have to monitor yourself. Usually 3 to 4 sets. Start out with 15, maybe 20. See where you're at. See what you can do comfortably, and then do 4 sets. Thing with reverse crunches, and these are where you stabilize your upper back. You might want to reach and grab something while you're on your back, and bring your knees up to your chest. So it's a reverse crunch. The other way crunch, I think most people know what crunches are, where you can stabilize your neck, not your head. A lot of people, when they stabilize their head, they're causing what's called forward head posturing. If they're working in front of a computer all day, they already have enough forward head posturing activities. So if you get right under the neck, when you're doing crunches, lay on your back, bring your knees up about 90 degrees, and you just bring your chest up. You bring basically your head to your knees, and those are called crunches. And then you can reverse by grabbing something, bringing your knees to your chest, and those are reverse crunches. So again, 4 sets, 3 sets, start out with 15 to 20, and just move up from there. So that's for rectus abdominis. Now the next one is the obliques. These are the ones on the side. And you can do 3 different exercises. One is similar to what you said, Dr. Mike. It's a plank. But instead of like putting your pressure on your elbows, you put them on your hands. And then to get those oblique, you have either a weight or a kettlebell, and you put it on the opposite side of your body at the level of your abdominal. So if you're doing the planks, you're holding up, you're going to reach over and bring it to your side and stabilize yourself. And you're going to reach over, grab the other one, bring it to this side, to the same side that your arm is on, and you just keep doing sets. Again, start out small, just minimal sets, see what you can handle, and then you work up. And then the next one, cable or a band, and you're basically twisting. But don't forget to twist the other side as well. I always tell golfers, like golfers are the ones that they're always swinging one side. They're getting a great abdominal work on one side, but not the other. And how many golfers have low back problems? A lot. first of all, they're bending forward, which is one of the worst positions. And then you add a twist, and those two combinations make it the worst for your core and your back. So the reality is, if you're always swinging on one side, I tell people, get a cable and work your other oblique muscles as well. The other thing you can use is a medicine ball, and you can do basically what's called lateral medicine ball slams. You take the medicine and you twist and you throw the ball against a wall. And if you do it one way, just make sure you have symmetry and do it the other way so you get both of those obliques. The next one is called the transverse muscles, and these are engaged every day. Every single core exercise is engaged with the transverse. So basically, one of the ways you can do this one, and this is one of my favorites, is you lay on your back, bring your knees up, and then you lock your hands behind your neck, not your head, your neck, and you bring your elbow to the opposite knee as you're flexing that knee, and then you do the same thing to the other side. And you go back and forth at a nice, comfortable pace. That's going to get your transverse abdominis. And again, start out slow and try to do 3 sets, maybe up to 4 sets. The other one is called the bird dog. That's when you're on all fours and you extend your right arm up at the same time as you're extending your left your left leg backwards. And then you do the opposite of that, and that's just called the bird dog. So you can do a search engine to see exactly what we're talking about. So me personally, when I do my abs, I'll do some crunches. I'll do the reverse kind of movement where you're bringing your left elbow to your right knee and work the abs that way. And then I'll also lay on my side, completely on my side, and I'll put my hand back on my neck, and I'll just go to the one side to get the transverse and the obliques at the same time. So I find those very helpful, and then I'll do some crunches just to kind of burn it out. And I'll do like 3 to 4 sets. The other aspects is like, if you have tight quads, can that affect the core? Yes. If they're too tight and you're not getting enough flexibility, there's such thing as a balance. You need to balance the pelvis. Same thing with the hamstrings. If they're too tight, or you maybe had a sports injury where you overstrained and strained the hamstring, and one side just doesn't have the same flexibility, and then that needs to be addressed, because that can pull in the pelvis and throughout that kinetic chain and other parts of your core. Basically, the bottom line is you need to stretch and strengthen your core, your quads, your hamstrings, and really get flexibility in your lumbars. And a lot of people say, what kind of strengthening exercises can I do for my low back? And I don't know if I recommend so much strengthening specific for the low back as I do work on those core exercises that we talked about. Because when you work the core, not only are you working for the strength of the core, but you're also getting some flexibility. Because if you're working one side, if I'm taking a medicine ball and I'm tossing against the wall, in one respect, I'm getting some strength work. In other respects, I'm getting some flexibility in that. The one thing that I don't recommend is some people will be on these machines where they basically have their pelvis locked and their hands are behind their back, and they're kind of leaning forward. I don't know if I can explain this properly, but they're leaning down over a machine that stabilizes their pelvis, and then they extend up. And the reason I don't recommend that exercise is, first of all, people want to do that when they're already in a pain situation. And whenever you exercise with such intensity on a joint that's already painful, it's not a good combination. And plus, a lot of people don't realize, but because of their core might be off, you take an x-ray and they might just have a slight curvature, not a big major problem, not a scoliosis, just a mild curve. And if you're doing these exercises where you're bent down and you're lifting up from your pelvis, you can basically work these muscles a little bit asymmetrically. So I recommend doing the core exercises more so than that. How about you, Mike? How do you feel about that exercise? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I call it the hyper extension machine. And I've seen people grab 45-pound plates and put them on behind their head or holding them in front of them. And going way too much into extension, hyperextending their back. And
Mm.
just, I think they're using hip flexors and all these other muscles, kind of like doing sit-ups. You're rocking and you're using hip flexors and you're hurting. Again, like I said earlier, we want to keep you in the gym. We want to keep you working out at home. We want to keep you on the playing field. So that's just a higher risk. Deadlifts, some people think that strengthens your core and things like that. I say take the high risk exercises out. There's so many other things you can do.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Mike. I think core is one of those things that people need to kind of look and understand the muscles. I know it's hard to explain on a podcast, especially if you're just listening to our Spotify, maybe just the audio. Maybe you can get a little bit more when you're watching our hand gestures. But I think some of the terms that we have here and some of the muscles, I think it's worth looking it up, finding a search engine and finding some good resources to really get into it. If you understood everything that we said, then that's perfect. You're good to go.
Absolutely. A couple other things that I throw in there too, Dr. Gordy. I like simple when you're on your belly after your plank or something. I like simple, just like 10 or 20 glute squeezes to fire your glutes to make sure they're firing. And one of my favorite ab workouts and core workouts and back workouts, I do something called foundation training. So there's a website, foundationtraining.com, or on YouTube, if you type in foundation training, their first video is about 12 minutes that explaining 4 or 5 exercises that are really, really, really good for the core, how to hip hinge and then strengthen those paraspinal muscles in the back. I'm a huge fan of those instead of the hyperextensions and deadlifts and all these other things to strengthen the back. I think if you work on your core, like a lot of the exercises you recommended, and then foundation training, wow, that really helps that cylinder of all of your core muscles. So I like that, Dr. Gordy. And then when people sometimes get into this right away and it's like, wow, this feels really good. Let's do another 100 crunches. And wow, that first 1 minute plank was kind of hard. Let's do another one. And wow, I did 3 or 4 minute planks, and crunches, and wow. And then the next day they're hunched over and they're hurting so much. Been there, done that, I guess. But there's a reflex right next to your belly button. So you can take your thumb or a massage gun and just hit the reflex a couple inches away to the side of your belly button, and that's the center of your psoas. That relaxes your hip flexors or your psoas muscle. And so I highly recommend working on that anyway, because when you're doing these core workouts 2 to 3 times a week, you're going to notice some improvement. And that's really, really good thing. But you don't want to get over tight, like Dr. Gordon said. Then you want to stretch your quads and your hams and things like that. So those are just a couple of things. Some glute squeezes, hit the psoas reflex. Look up on YouTube foundation training exercises for the hip hinge and they're based. One of them, my favorites, Dr. Gordy, is basically like a Superman or Superwoman, where you're laying flat out, flat out on your belly, your legs are together. You put your hands by your side, like you're laying face down. You squeeze your legs together and your glutes, and then you bring your upper body up off the ground just a couple inches, and then you'll feel those lower lumbar muscles contract, but you're only coming up off the floor a couple of inches. So it's a really controlled contraction, and you can really feel your glutes fire and your paraspinal muscles in the back. And some people call that Superman or Superwoman. You don't have to lift your legs off the floor if you don't want. So that's a form of what foundation training is. It's very controlled, very safe to do, even if you have disc issues and facet injuries and some past surgeries. You can do those controlled exercises.
That's great, Dr. Mike. Most of these exercises we're talking about, you don't even need to go to the gym.
Yeah.
You could do these in the living room. You could do them in your bedroom. You can do them before you go to bed. You really don't need equipment in the most part. I mean, unless you get a big medicine ball and you got to find a wall to throw it against. But the reality is you can do these at home, very simple. We can just separate your gym workout and just do your core at home before you go to bed or in the morning or whatever your routine allows.
Great point. Great point. Anytime, anywhere. I have 6 to represent 6-pack helpful hints to improve your core. Incorporate cardio to burn calories into your workout. Try high intensity intermittent type training as well. Increase your protein if your protein isn't adequate. Also decrease your refined carbohydrates / sugar, because we want to burn some of the belly fat over our muscles if you want to show off some 6-packs. And then keep hydrated well. And then just try a bunch of variety of abs. If you're just only doing crunches, look up a plank challenge and try some of the dead bugs and the foundation training and side planks and the kettlebell stuff that Dr. Gordon talked about. Try some variety in your workout and see if that will help you go to the next level with your abs.
Yeah, and I would recommend, I give a list of all kinds of core exercises, especially for the abs. I wouldn't do all of them, but I would say, just like what you said, Dr. Mike, switch them up, try some. Try like 2 or 3 of the exercises for the abs, maybe just 2. Try 2. Try them all to begin with, not really for the workout initially, but see which ones you resonate with, and then stick with 2. And then switch those up. Maybe try another 2 in the next workout. So I think it's good to switch it up and have a little fool your muscles, so to speak. Just do something a little bit different each time.
Absolutely. Great advice. And how I usually close, Dr. Gordon, I like to ask our audience, what's your number one takeaway that you could share with someone at the water cooler tomorrow, or with your spouse, or with a neighbor if you're out walking the dog? What's your number one takeaway that you could share? And then number 2 is, what's your number one action step that you can leave this podcast with and start doing today? Are you going to go do a plank challenge? Are you going to test to see how long you can do a plank? You're going to try some of these other ab exercises that Dr. Gordy mentioned. You're going to look up online and get a little bit of anatomy lesson to see the pictures that he was talking about. What's your number one action step that you're going to do today?
That's awesome, Dr. Mike. Please join us. We're on weekly and for now, and we're also we have our own website. We have 3 social media sites. You can join us on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. We're on Spotify. We're also on YouTube. So please join us as we continue to expand our reach. So Dr. Mike, what do we have going for next week?
Well, on the Health Angle podcast, we hit every angle of your health. And one thing that influences every angle of your health is something called inflammation. So we're going to talk about the low anti-healthy inflammation aspect of your lifestyle and how you can improve inflammation in your life.
That's a perfect subject. With that said, please subscribe. Keep following us. And Dr. Mike, I'll let you lead us out.
All right. Thank you for joining us. It's been really exciting. And talk to you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the Health Angle podcast. Please subscribe to our channel and catch us for our next episode.